In the last lecture module, we saw how Skinner's radical behaviorism, through its introduction of operant conditioning as well as classical conditioning, can explain a much wider variety of behaviors, more complex behaviors, self-motivated behaviors, behaviors that don't have to be learned in a relatively structured environment in a passive manner. However, as our criticism here from John Dewey, which was really a sort of criticism that he offered, indicates, Skinner's operant conditioning still can explain all of the sorts of differential responses that one would like. So, for instance, those pigeons in his movie don't peck at colors or words when they're not hungry. A wolf chasing a rabbit might well come across a variety of stimuli while tracking the animal. Why don't these stimuli elicit responses, causing the wolf to forget about the rabbit? Why does the wolf attend to the rabbit trail and ignore these other stimuli? Nothing in basic radical behaviorism helps us to understand these problems. As a result, behaviorists had long been looking for alternative ways of increasing the manner in which they were capable of explaining differential behavior. And the neo-behaviorists, like Hull here, were looking inside the organism. They weren't necessarily looking for conscious features of the organism's mentation, but they were looking for parameters that they could still get at and quantify operationally, or at least get it operationally. But they were open to the idea of not treating the brain or the mind as a black box in the way that Watson or Skinner would. So Clark Hull represents a bridge between behaviorism and cognitive psychology. He and Toulmin, who had a great deal of disputes with one another, come to view behavior as goal-oriented and introduce intervening variables between stimulus and response in order to explain behavior. For Hull, like Toulmin, experimenters must characterize intervening variables as primarily physiological and capable of being operationalized without difficulty. For example, in Hull's Principles of Behavior, which he published in 1943, he introduces a mathematical formulation to capture the relationship between environmental situations, intervening variables, and learned responses. The elements of this equation are as follows. D is for drive, and that is a variable that he introduced to capture the idea that behavior is fueled by biological need. We have a strength of association, a habit strength, represented as subscript S, uppercase H, subscript R. And this represents the connection between the environmental situation and the response as measured in the number of pairings. Finally, we have the reaction potential, subscript S, capitalized E, subscript R. And this represents the probability of the subject manifesting a learned response. The equation that Hull introduced, at least initially, and of course he complicates it as time goes by, is that the reaction potential equals the habit strength times the drive. In the next and last lecture module, we'll take a look at Toulmin, and we'll then rehearse some ideas that I suggest are morals we can derive from consulting the rise of empirical psychology, in addition to helping prepare us to better understand the, for instance, logical behaviorists that are going to be following this lecture next week when we return to philosophy.